Hello and welcome to the Roundtable podcast. My name is Rafi. Here today we got Drew. Please follow us on our 4 different YouTube channels, our BitChute, and please join the Roundtable Discord where we do daily podcasts, voice chats, active VCs. And yes, so today we'll be talking to Drew about the alchemical legend, the Philosopher's Stone. Without any further ado, how are you doing, Drew?
I'm doing really good. Thank you for having me today. I appreciate it.
No problem. I was very excited when you hit me up with this subject. I'm super excited to talk about. So, where would you like to start us off talking about the alchemical legend of the Philosopher's Stone?
I think it would do justice to talk about the people who brought the legend to life, right? And that's the alchemists. For a long time, before there was chemistry, doctors, psychology, all of this stuff was lumped together in a category called alchemy for ages. So it became increasingly more popularized in the 17th and 18th century, and there's quite a few top list alchemists of the time. And their long pursuit is to increase the longevity of people and to take base metals and turn them into more valuable metals. And this would alleviate them from having to go through strenuous processes of gold mines and things of that nature. It just took a lot of hassle off of the royalty and having to pretty much enslave people and have them go into these covens and dig out gold and these precious minerals when they could much easily just melt down lead over and over and over and synthesize it into a new material. And this legend of turning lead into gold was what brought them to fame, really. And later, the process of that is where they really impacted our history and where we're at in modern science.
Well, that's very interesting. And so, the Philosopher's Stone, how does the Philosopher's Stone relate to these people? Is it a legend or are they trying to synthesize that as well?
It's definitely the literal process they took very seriously. It was not a legend to them. They were trying to make a stone that could make somebody immortal, essentially, and it could turn any metal into gold. And what you would do is you would take the synthesized stone and you would put it in the process of a new metal, right? And while you're synthesizing this metal with this stone, it would turn that metal into gold. And so this is what really inspired it. There's many cases of individuals trying to do this process, but there's little to no success in it. Over time, I say that the desperation of trying to do this process led to deep states of meditation in the process itself, and they were able to look at that process and go, well, if I can't turn this into gold, I'll turn myself into gold, essentially. And so there's a lot of spiritual dichotomy that roots off from alchemy's literal translations. I don't think the alchemists of that time were intending for it to provoke such a spiritual drive as it does today. I think that they thought that they were going to be able to turn metals, cheap metals, into gold, and that they didn't succeed. But somehow that legend was so driven by the public's greed that people still to this day even strive to do the great work and try. But I think the most fascinating thing in modern times is the spiritual translation of these things. And there's a ton of interpretations out there. I think the Jungian psychology interpretation is my favorite personally. He broke it down into 4 steps, and it's a interpersonal work you do. It's a crazy venture when you do it yourself, and I think a lot of people already are doing this. They're trying to make themselves a better person. The good metaphor is turning a heart of lead into gold.
Yeah, for sure. There's that book by Jung, Internal Alchemy or Alchemy of the Soul, something like that. Is that one of the books you're referring to by him?
Yeah, he also wrote a book, The Philosopher's Stone, the Red Book, and it's filled with all kinds of allegories and interpretations of scripture, and he ties it up with psychology and the process of alchemy itself. So if you have the dedication and you're interested, Jungian interpretations of the Philosopher's Stone is the way to go for a modern understanding of these things. And the history in itself is fascinating too. It's a rabbit hole to learn about these alchemists of their time. And you'll find many legends connected to it. Just about every religion in the world has some form of reference to the Philosopher's Stone. And it's like almost like the Holy Grail for the alchemist.
So what happens internally with the Philosopher's Stone spiritually? What like when one can create the Philosopher's Stone within themselves and turn themselves into gold spiritually, what happens with that process and how does one induce it?
Uh, One can be induced into this process by the brutal that is reality. We are constantly synthesized into a new person every day. We're broken down by reality. And you could look at this, and this is the first step in the Philosopher's Stone. The process is called negro. It represents blackness. The Jungian translation is an ego death, right? It's where your ego gets broken down, and you have to deal with that, and you have to rebuild the self from this point and kind of rise like a phoenix from the ashes, so to speak. Which after an ego death, you would have this transitioning period of great change in your life. And that would lead you into albro, the whiteness. The whiteness is very much trying to refine again the better qualities of yourself and aligning that with spirit, your spiritual self, and refining who you are ethically, right? What does your intuition say is right and wrong? Because this is a yin and yang conflict now. This isn't a material conflict. And so once you've balanced yourself in albedo and you seek center, and a good way to look at this is Taoism. I think it represents albedo very, very well. and from this point on, it kind of builds up from this theme of yin and yang, because you move on to cetonatus, and that's yellowness. And I may be not pronouncing these right, but anyhow, I'll keep going. And that represents an alignment of the feminine, the divine feminine, and the divine masculine. We take for granted our relationship with ourselves inside and the qualities that make us human. We are deeply balanced like yin and yang, and we don't understand that if we float one way or the other too much, we're not going to interact with the world in a way that yields the best results, right? But if you're a very balanced person, you will have a much greater effect on yourself and others and the world around you. And so you kind of get stuck at this point. The Philosopher's Stone is the great journey itself. You could say that Rubido is a life lived well. It's a life lived very well, and that you lived up to who you wanted to be in your life. And that is the great work, is that at the moment of death, if you're happy with the life you've lived, you've probably achieved a great work. You can intuitively know this, right? And you could even argue that Rubido is a symbol of enlightenment, that's the final step in it all, is it's understanding, it's deep wisdom, and it's a journey fulfilled. And I don't think any of us will ever feel truly fulfilled until our last days, when we can look back and go, yes, I see truly now what my life is. Because we can say we're enlightened now and we're aware, but how enlightened are we going to be with hindsight, right, of the journey we've lived? And so that's one way to look at this process of the Philosopher's Stone.
Wow. So that's the spiritual journey of going inward and having the revelation of the Philosopher's Stone. But what is the physical, the original alchemical Philosopher's Stone? What is the process? Like, what is that made of? And if it's made, what is the process of making it that they believed?
They believed that they were going to, and this is kind of one of those things that it's still to this day being decoded, actually. And you could argue for hours that it is possible to make the Philosopher's Stone. They just haven't found the right method yet. And you can find about 100 different ways that different alchemists have tried to make the Philosopher's Stone. And every single one of them involves taking any basic element and trying to break it down and boil it, burn it, and keep it at like very stable temperatures. And they would just keep trying to synthesize these things into different metals. Truth is none of these ways have worked. And I'm not an expert in a specific route that one of these individuals would take. I'm more so of an expert in the spiritual side of the journey, because it aligns with most religious beliefs in the journey of like healing in the self, right? So it's a bit more easier to explain the symbolism, but the actual chemistry of it is super complex, and I cannot offer a sound reason for the many different ways they tried to break these things down. There's some ridiculous ones. I've even heard of an individual trying to boil a metal with their own piss and trying to synthesize a new metal that way. They succeeded and made something else that we still use to this day, but we don't use urine. We use a highly acidic water like solution to do that these days. But it's just, if you dig deep enough, you'll find a few fascinating stories about individuals trying to do this.
So what are some other things maybe that alchemists started like that and discovered maybe inadvertently or advertently?
They've discovered quite a few metals we use to this day. Like there's a finer steel that we use today that's all around us. It's used on a modern level. Most of our like prescription medications all originate from this line of work, right? Like they're the ones that synthesized a lot of like the painkillers way back in the day. They were the ones that were doing their herbal remedies long before New Age people got into it and it started to be popularized. And it's quite fascinating how there was like these two parties that developed in like the 19th century. There was the alchemists that worked in the snake oils like environment, and then there's these big and upcoming pharmaceutical companies that are pushing like cocaine, heroin, several different kinds of like big drugs that are highly addictive and were being used throughout the Civil War. But I think you get the idea is that there was this huge split, and it seemed like almost like there was this propaganda around herbal remedies that was kind of pushed at this time period. But you can still find grandparents out there that practice alchemy and don't even know it. So you can look just around any medicine cabinet, any garden, and find a very valuable resource that alchemists offered us.
So what are some examples of then daily alchemy, simple alchemy, like things that's chemical and internal? What are some daily ways we'd find alchemy in our lives?
It's again, it's everywhere. Like, you can have teas. There plenty of teas out there. There's you can make tinctures, essential oils you can make from home. I I'm not an expert in metallurgy. Metallurgy is something different. I'm now learning herbology more so these days. So I'm in the beginner routes. So I wouldn't have any too grand of recommendations, but I do promise that alchemy is a lot more mundane than people really think. So all the examples I have to give are pretty mundane. In their day-to-day life, we all actually practice alchemy in some way and just don't realize it.
So I guess then is the philosopher's stone something that an individual should seek out? Should they follow the path of the philosopher's stone for the reason for the reason that it's the best path, or is it sort of stuck in the past in the sense that it was a remnant of alchemical times?
I'd say it's the equivalent journey of anyone seeking enlightenment. You could look at enlightenment as the same venture, in that I think we all just take for granted what's right in front of us, right? Because once you achieve enlightenment, you realize how important the now is and who you are. So if you're seeking the philosopher's stone, just stop and take a look in the mirror and remember you are the philosopher's stone.
Yeah, I had a realization one time, I think, about the philosopher's stone, where I realized it was always in my hand, or it was always near me, or it was always like available in the sense that it wasn't a physical thing, but it was the revelation that I was the thing that could help myself out. And like it was sort of like a revelation of enlightenment in that sense. And the Philosopher's Stone was just a metaphor that when I was holding the actual stone, that meant that I was just in that state of mind and controlling that. Is that sort of like allegorical to the this different steps you were talking about earlier?
Yeah, absolutely. That completely ties in.
Hmm. So you talked about ego death in the first step and then having to rebuild your ego and go through those different things. Do you want to talk about, because that sort of struck me as odd, why is ego death the first thing that we have to go through in order to find the Philosopher's Stone?
Because the ego is the number one thing that holds us back, right? If we're tying it all back to ourselves and like we're having to realize how, magnificent of a miracle we are, our ego is going to be the first thing in its way. The ego is desperate to have its individuality, and we don't realize how special we are until that ego steps aside and you get a window into the vast majority of divinity, right? So the ego's the thing that you have to set aside so that you can become a more pure person. And it's not to kill it forever. It's only to like shed your skin like a snake, you know?
Hmm. Yes, that follows with sort of my understanding of like that's more of sort of like Taoism's take on ego death than say like Terence McKenna's take on ego death. It's more of like a realization and a revelation than a state of absence of something that one has. And then whenever we regain that ego, it's us choosing to bring those things back. So that second step is the ego death is bringing us to that state of realization. And then when we rebuild, that's us coming back with our, I don't know what you would call it in this form, our like our new self, our shed skin. And then
Right.
what's the third step?
The third step's the alignment of the divine feminine and the divine masculine. Um, so you intuitively are, as a male, like you can be defensive, stand your ground, challenge a situation, so on and so forth, and just head on, butt headstrong. Feminine qualities include loving, confiding, the energy of the moon, intuitive. And so these things separated are in a holy matrimony the epitome of the philosopher's stone. And that's what some people would argue that marriage could be the completion of the great work too, but that's just one spin on it. But I say it's more personal than that. I don't think it has to be in reality. I think you on an individual level can come to better love those around you or better stand your ground in your beliefs or, challenge the status quo or etc. Like we see it in our partners. If you do have a partner, you can see the qualities in them that you lack, and you as individuals want to live up to one another and to be a better person day to day and grow and learn together. So you can do that with yourself, right? And that's what this step is about. It's about aligning these qualities within yourself because they are extremely important at interacting with our world. Imagine a world where everybody was loving and butt-headed. Like, you know what I mean? Like, but it's always one way or the other. And you can look at examples like Buddha, Jesus, like these holy figures, right? Like they are the epitome of this great work. Like they were strong in their beliefs, they stood for what they believed in, and they were loving, kind, and etc. I think you get the point.
Yeah. It sort of sounds like the way you're describing the internal Philosopher's Stone, at least in this step, is like the yin yang symbol. It's that androgynous truth of reality that everything you create has a polar opposite. Is that sort of the reality of coming to terms in your mind that any parallel or pole that is available in your mind, there is an opposite to that, and accepting that as an existing feature is important to be able to move on and reach this state of enlightenment?
Yeah, it's required almost.
Mm.
Like the path to enlightenment, like I'd say step 3 and step 4, like Rubido, they kind of coincide with each other, because like once you've completed the great work, it's at the end of your days, but it's only because you are the Philosopher's Stone, so the work's not done till you're done, right? But you could argue that once you've hit enlightenment, that your journey has just begun, and that you now have the tools, the stone, to cooperate with co-creation.
Wow. Well, that hits home to me because I actually plan on getting a tattoo of the yin yang symbol split in two between both my wrists as like a symbol of the the Zen and Taoist truth of reality. And I feel like I want that to symbolize the path that I've already walked through. So it's interesting to say that the end of the journey is having realized an internal revelation of that, when I want that as an external example of my internal revelation of the same thing. I don't
Right.
know if that really made sense,
Yep.
but
It does. Makes perfect
so,
sense.
but it sounds like you were also saying that step 3 and step 4 are necessary. How many steps were there total again? 6?
You could argue that there's 7 in the synthesis process. There's enough. I have a picture I can send anyone here that I'll just do it in the chat room here in a minute. But there's the 7 steps in one process, and then there's the Jungian philosophy and a few others that argue that there's 4 steps. I'm more familiar with the 4 steps.
Okay, so then you get to the 3rd step, and then the 4th step is the final step. So once you have that, finally you've accepted the opposites within you, and then you're able to see the truth of like everything, and then move forward as the bodhisattva who gets to come back and share his knowledge.
Exactly. Yep.
So then where does that leave us? Is there a next step to that?
Live a good life, man. That's it.
Live a good
be the change you wish to see in the world, right?
Mm. So do you think that philosophy itself, do you think that the teaching of teaching enlightenment through this alchemical metaphor and an internal transformation is a more viable and efficient route of that revelation than others?
Yeah, to a degree. It depends where you come from, though. Like, I'm born in a Western society, and I grew up that I liked Harry Potter. I liked, you know what I mean? Like, there's a little
Mm.
bit of a stigma that goes here. Like, there's things I just like a little bit more. Like, so for me, it was perfect, right? But if you're in another country and you're around another culture, you're gonna find the same journey on your own if you really need it, you know?
I definitely agree. Like I went through a lot of different books that were sort of summarized versions of the total journey through, and I read a lot of alchemy books, but also Taoism and Buddhism and Zen and spirituality, Eastern, Western, different things like that. And the different journey, it often sums up into a very condensed version of exactly what you're talking about. And the way that you're saying this is very condensed. And honestly, I will say, having read a lot of those books that have like 4 steps or like 8 steps that are the main steps, what you're saying here with alchemy seems to be one of the most intelligent ways of saying it and condensing it into important features that are like digestible and teachable. Because oftentimes, like, with the 4 noble truths in Buddhism, it's the 4 noble truths, which is really just the eightfold path, which is really just a way to get you read all the sutras, which is really a way to get you to realize that none of it mattered. But that's
Yeah.
sort of a well, that yeah. But I don't know. I think it's very interesting how this is very condensed and very direct.
Yeah, I appreciate it. There's actually a meditative process that you can do as well. Um, I do recommend if you're going to engage with it, you read up on the 4 steps, like Jungian philosophy, and then just watch a few videos on it, get a better understanding of what it was like for these individuals at the time. And I recommend meditating and visualizing yourself, synthesizing yourself, breaking yourself down, and like you like would break you would turn yourself black, right? Like in your mind, and you would take yourself, you'd pick yourself up, put yourself in a grind bowl. I forget what they're called, but it's a mortar and pestle. That's right. And you would
Mm.
grind yourself up to a pulp, and you would imagine all these memories of like arrogant actions, selfish actions, egoic things, kind of like simmering and like coming from like the smoke of it. And then you would take that and you would pour it into a flask, put it on the thing, put a dash of water in it, boil it, and just ruminate on all the things that you've done throughout your life, and just watch your ego boil in front of you. And you onwards, you would just go through the whole process and visualize yourself being broken down and turned into a philosopher's stone. And this is a good way to do like a meditative practice, and you could do this in 10 minutes, and you just imagine yourself breaking yourself down, turning yourself each of these colors. And with the final step, you take a deep breath and feel the rush of energy come into you, and go about your day as if you're ready to complete the great work.
Wow. That is truly profound. Yeah, that metaphor is amazing. So I don't know. Would you like to open it up to questions? Do you have anything else you would like to add about the Philosopher's Stone, the inward journey, or alchemy in the physical sense?
Honestly, I'm content. I'd rather keep it simple because it gets over complicated very quickly. So we can just open it up to the floor. I like to keep these kind of things simple, or else it just seems redundant. So let's go.
You've done a very good job of keeping it simple and staying away from redundancy. I can definitely say that for sure. If anyone has any questions, the floor is now open. I think Drew would love to hear them.
Yeah, I'm considering, well, it's basically my questions concerning what you just mentioned, the meditation or the visualization, the imagining part of breaking yourself down with all of your heavy burdens, I guess, right? And watching them burn and walk away so that you can spend your day lighter, I suppose. Is that a technique that you use to be able to just live in your moment, like just be?
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, it's another good metaphor of this is the way people will burn notes, like manifesto notes. You'd write a note to yourself and you'd burn it and just walk away. And this is a more positive light, but it's the same idea. If you want healing, the act of this would be in your mind as you burn away all your worries, and it would be healing you in a way. And it's not like an avoidance or like a form of repression. It's deeply facing it, because while you're breaking yourself down, you're facing it before letting it go, which is really important for like the process of healing.
And I guess with that act, you're actually allowing yourself you're allowing yourself to be in the moment, to experience your life without having those heavy burdens. Huh.
Yep, exactly.
Are there any other techniques that you use?
Sorry.
I use other meditative practices. Like I like to imagine like white light coming down into me and filling my body, and as it fills me, black smoke will come out of my orifices, like my nose and my mouth and my ears, and it will seep away from me. That's another smaller practice you could do in like 5 minutes, and it's like you could give it the example of like it's as refreshing as a deep breath of air. So yeah, there's another small one. There's tons of practices out there. Just about a lot of meditative practices that include visualization will have the same intentions as the first meditative practice for the alchemy I gave.
Thank you.
Annie, did you have a question?
Yeah, I mean, I've always liked the philosophical and like meditative sides of alchemy compared to like the. I think your history of the field is rather accurate from what I've read about it. Like as the desires of reality, well, they hit hard limits of reality, but the discipline you learn can be applied in a metaphysical way where reality doesn't let you, and that's always just fascinating to me. The fact, like the way you're describing, they failed to make metal gold, so they sought to make themselves gold. I think that was a great line you said. If this is being recorded, I'm going to re-listen to that part because it's quite a good quote. But like even studying like astronomy, I find this is still very relevant in terms of like the outlook you're talking about. Like for example, the thing that kills stars ultimately is their hearts get too hard. They start by processing, hydrogen to helium to carbon and oxygen, and eventually they hit lead, and they can no longer fuse lead into anything higher, so they just grow hard and die. And ultimately, what kills a star, what kills a light being, is a metal heart, is a solid heart that takes over and kills it from the inside out. And I think even from alchemic perspective, you can start applying this to other fields like astronomy and like probably biology somewhere else too. I think that was really cool. How you took the discipline that, even though it doesn't necessarily work that well sometimes in real material senses, it's incredibly deep in a spiritual sense.
I appreciate it. Yeah. Thank you, man.
I have another question. I was super interested. I was very into when you were talking about the internal alchemy and how that works, like with turning yourself into gold, break yourself down, add water, boil yourself down. I was wondering if you had any other meditative practices related to alchemy, like that are useful, like in the day-to-day life.
Yeah, I use the four folds a lot. It's the easiest one. I've talked about it before in previous podcasts. It's the most useful to me because I can just imagine an element and I'm breathing it in and I'm exhaling and I'm just rotating this energy, and it's me embodying the four elements around me, right? So you would be breathing, you count 4 breaths, like you'd count 2-4 with one breath, and then you'd hold for 4 seconds, exhale for 4 seconds, and so on. And you'd keep doing this while imagining an element rotating through your body. And that one's really useful for keeping your energies aligned, because just like we talked about aligning the divine feminine and masculine, it's important that we align the elements that we're surrounded by inside of ourselves as well, as above so below, right? So if we're unbalanced with earth, then the earth is going to fight us and we're going to fight it and not realize it. And so it's really important for us to be aligning these elements inside of ourselves.
Wow. Does anyone else have a question?
Yeah, I was wondering how you would, if there's any suggestions that you have on creating that sense of balance between the masculine and the feminine. You're saying basically to be able to have balance of both, that would allow you to properly achieve that state. Are there any techniques that you would use for the balancing of that?
Me personally, because I watch a lot of movies, I watch a lot of TV, and so I kind of have these role models in life that are actors and actresses. And so usually, like, whatever favorable quality that would align with a divine masculine or feminine in like a character I see on TV, I would try to embody that in myself, to a certain extent. And it's hard to explain because when you're in these deep states of meditation, things just flood in, right? So like a part of me really looks up to like Robin Williams, and like even someone like as simple as like Arnold Schwarzenegger, right? And like it's goofy, I know, but you imagine yourself as these individuals, and like you would be switching faces constantly with the opposite gender in this meditation, and trying to put yourself in their shoes. And by expressing this empathy with something or someone you're familiar with, and you don't have to do this with like TV models or anything like that, like you can use people in your life, like women or men that you look up to, switch faces with them and embody them for a moment. And it's other cultures talk about goetic entities that have a million faces. And so again, we're talking about like a deep internal process, and goetic entities, demons, they often are symbolism of deeper parts of ourselves. So when we're switching these masks, this is one of those goetic entities. I can't remember which one, but we're practicing that. We're embodying that same sentiment of expressing this deep, profound empathy with everyone around us. And the more you do this, and the more you familiarize yourself with other people's perspectives, you'll find yourself encouraging those characteristics in your own life.
Great, thank you.
So, what's some advice for, say, somebody who's like down and out and they don't have spiritual energy and they need some, or they're drained or something, what would be an exercise alchemically that they could do to up their energy? So just to try to understand kind of the intuitive way that this alchemical system of energy work operates.
I think, honestly, I can't think of anything other than the practice itself. When it's hard, because if the individual doesn't have the drive, they may not have the drive to even look into these things, right? So it really comes into play with the amount of fascination the individual is going to have. I deeply recommend that people get into the rabbit hole and find the practice that suits them best. But the one I've already spoken on, it kind of embodies the central principles around alchemy. There's not that much more to it, unfortunately. Um, Now you can get into like the herbology and like the literal stuff and like turn it into a hobby, and that could deeply impact their life and make them feel more involved in the world. But this just comes down to like an individual, right? Like we can't push meditation on people. We can't push these things and hope that that it's going to work, right? We have to be able to hope that they're going to get the most out of whatever they get in life. But if they find alchemy and they enjoy the rabbit hole, I think in itself that journey is exhilarating in itself. So I just recommend the journey.
Well, all right. I think that is a great place to put a stamp in this. I'm going to open it up one last time for questions. Going once. Does anyone have a question for Drew? All right. Thank you so much for the live audience here. You guys have been great. Drew, you were fantastic. This podcast was awesome. Please like and subscribe to our the Roundtable Podcast YouTube channel, and join the Roundtable Discord where we do this podcast daily, and voice chats and everything. And all these fantastic people are here. And thank you for joining us. Good night. And we can go hop in the Roundtable voice chat and continue talking. And yeah, you guys were great.